It was not, properly speaking, the sort of weather that encouraged murder. Although, as Lord Peter Wimsey once remarked to a rather shocked vicar, I dare say a sultry evening does for passions what a warming pan does for rheumatism. It brings all the devilishness to the surface. And so it was, on one such sultry evening in the village of Goderstone in Kent, that the peaceable illusion of respectability dissolved with the shrill cry of a housemaid, followed by the heavy stillness of a household holding its breath. Lord Peter Wimsey, presently engaged in a postprandial whisky and soda while correcting proofs for the influence of Catullus on the early pulpits of England, looked up from his leather chair at the London Club and murmured, "That semicolon is frightfully optimistic. No Latin poet ever had patience for such punctuation." His telephone rang. The voice on the line belonged to Chief Inspector Parker, and it bore the peculiar tonality that suggested an invitation rather than a request. "It's the vicarage at Goderstone. Retired canon. One of those large rambling types with too many staircases and too little central heating. Canon Weatherby, mild sort, bit deaf, reports finding the body of Miss Clemency Blundell in his herb garden. Apparently, she had a fondness for fennel and expired dramatically among it." Wimsey was already extracting a tie from a drawer. "Oh, fennel, symbol of flattery in Hamlet, if memory serves. Poor Ophelia, and poor Miss Blundell, I suppose." "She was the village busybody," Parker said dryly. "No lack of motive, from what I gather. You wouldn't care to take a look, would you?" "My dear Charles," Wimsey said, pocketing a well-worn copy of The Consolation of Philosophy, "there are few things in life I love better than a corpse in a morally rigid garden." The village of Goderstone presented itself with a most unflappable air. There were prim hollyhocks by the post office, and a tea-shop named the Scarlet Teacup, the latter managed by a severe widow whose eyebrows arched like inverted commas at the mention of anything new. The vicarage stood slightly apart from the rest of the village, its garden wild but not unloved, enclosed by a high stone wall with a wrought iron gate, latched always, for the foxes and children, as the canon put it. Miss Clemency Blundell had been discovered at 6:30 that evening, face down in the parsley, her gardening gloves still on, and a small trowel inches from her hand. At first glance, one might have imagined she had simply overexerted herself in pursuit of some particularly stubborn root, until one noticed the curious contortion of her spine and the crimson welling through the gingham at her shoulder. "She appears to have been stabbed," said Dr. Meldrum, the village GP, as Wimsey stooped to examine the scene with unfeigned interest. Wimsey flicked a blade of rosemary from the hem of his cuff. "So she does. Though one might say she was also peppered, timed, and suitably seasoned. A culinary demise." "Time of death?" asked Parker, notebook in hand. Meldrum scratched at his chin. "Between 5 and 6. Hard to be more precise." "And the gate?" Wimsey turned suddenly toward Canon Weatherby, who was wringing his hands with ecclesiastical despair. "Latched, as always," the canon said. "Miss Blundell had her own key. I suppose someone else could have climbed over the wall, but, well, it's rather high, and the holly hedge is quite unkind." Wimsey wandered to the gate and examined the latch with exaggerated care. So the garden was entered either by someone very determined or someone with a key. "She always locked it after herself," the canon added, as though that should settle the matter. "Or believed she had," Wimsey murmured. "These latches, canon, are as vain as bishops, given to appearances, not substance." A robin fluttered past, indifferent to the investigation. Wimsey straightened, brushing soil from his knees. "Tell me, canon, did Miss Blundell often come to tend your herbs?" "Oh, yes. Every Thursday and Saturday morning, and often of an evening, too. She was positively zealous about sage." "Indeed." Wimsey's voice trailed off, then reanimated itself brightly. "And did anyone else know of her fondness for evening weeding?" "Everyone, I should think," the canon said, bewildered. Clemency made it known she preferred to garden when the sun had lost its vulgarity. Her words. Whimsy's eyes glinted. A woman of poetic vitriol. Delightful. He returned his attention to the herbaceous border. The soil was damp, but not muddy, and the footprints visible there were few and clear. A woman's narrow sole, a man's larger heel, but curiously angled, as if the foot had slid. He made a note of it, then strolled to the potting shed and peeked inside. He rejoined Parker. "There's a boot scraper by the shed that appears to have been wiped recently. But no one's mentioned rain." "There hasn't been any," Parker confirmed. "Then someone was cleaning more than conscience," Whimsy said cheerfully. "My dear Charles, the plot thickens, but only slightly. We are, after all, in Kent. Do you think the killer climbed the wall?" "No," said Whimsy, tapping his cane gently against the latched gate. "I think the killer had a key, or Miss Blundell let them in willingly." He paused, eyes twinkling, voice light. After all, the garden gate was latched. Whimsy's remark about the latched gate lingered in the thickening air like cigar smoke. Clever, elusive, and not easily dispelled. Parker made a non-committal noise in his throat, scribbled something in his notebook, and glanced toward the herbaceous border again. They stood a moment longer in the garden's strange hush. Somewhere, a thrush whistled. The canon had retreated indoors, decency demanding he leave the corpse to those who dealt in such things. Whimsy, meanwhile, crouched once more beside the body, not for the drama of it, but for a second inspection, an act of deliberate slowness, like a man rereading a cryptic sonnet he suspects of hiding some unseemly pun. "The gloves are peculiar," he said suddenly. Parker peered. "How so?" "Too clean. One would expect soil, yes, under the nails or smudged across the palms. But these are nearly pristine. And her trowel, see how it's dug into the earth? Yet there's no displaced soil elsewhere. No plantings or uprooted herbs, as though she was posed. You think she was killed elsewhere?" Whimsy shook his head. "No, I think she died here. But I think she came here for a different reason. Not gardening. One doesn't stab chrysanthemums with a trowel." Parker made a small grunt of agreement. "Right. Let's start knocking on doors." They began with the vicarage itself. Canon Weatherby welcomed them into a dimly lit sitting room whose every surface seemed to bear witness to the long decline of empire. Brass elephants, fraying Turkish carpets, a half-melted globe, and a faint, untraceable smell of cloves. "I wonder," Whimsy asked as he examined a bookshelf dominated by volumes of sermons and antique gardening manuals, "whether Miss Blundell had ever visited the house today, before she was found, I mean." "Oh, no," said the canon. "She came round last evening for tea, as she sometimes did. Stayed till nearly 8. But not today. I had my reading to attend to." He looked vaguely alarmed. "Do you suppose I should have noticed something?" "Not at all," said Whimsy kindly. "You've already supplied a valuable detail. 8 o'clock, you say? And she left alone?" "Yes, well, I assumed so. I didn't accompany her, of course. She always knew the way." "The garden gate," said Whimsy slowly. "Would it have still been latched at that hour?" "Oh yes, always. She was most particular." They moved on to the staff. The housekeeper, Mrs. Rankin, a pinched woman with a face like a clock wound too tightly, insisted she'd heard nothing out of the ordinary. She had been ironing napkins in the back room until dinner. No, she hadn't seen anyone enter the garden. Yes, Miss Blundell often came poking about the thyme beds unannounced. "She was that sort," said Mrs. Rankin disapprovingly, always rearranging the rosemary like it was hers. "Did she quarrel with anyone?" Parker asked. Mrs. Rankin gave a withering sniff. "Miss Blundell didn't need to quarrel. She just looked at you until you felt like the last dog at the village fete. She had an eye for secrets." "And did she ever keep them?" Whimsy interjected lightly. Mrs. Rankin's lips thinned further. Not if they belong to someone else. This small kernel of character, polished by repetition, was echoed throughout the village. A visit to the tea shop confirmed it. Mrs. Feeney, the widow with the comma-shaped brows, gave a slow, satisfied nod when asked about the deceased. She didn't believe in privacy, said it was a form of spiritual selfishness. Once told my niece's fiancé he was a bad investment because his trousers bagged at the knee. Did anyone threaten her? Parker asked. Threaten? Not exactly. Avoid, certainly. She was fond of notes, you know. Anonymous ones. Little slips of paper left in letter boxes or tucked behind jam jars. Warnings, mostly. About habits. What sort of habits? Mrs. Feeney's mouth twitched. Drinking, church attendance, that sort of thing. As they left, Whimsy said, "A village Savonarola with a gift for passive aggression. How very Kentish." They turned next toward a modest house on the green, where the front garden bristled with gladioli and anxious order. The door was answered by Miss Elsie Rowntree, a schoolmistress in a brown cardigan and spectacles that sat too far down her nose. Yes, I knew Miss Blundell. We had our disagreements. She said this without any discernible remorse. She interfered in the choir, said our renditions were too secular. I beg your pardon, but one can sing Wesley without full-blown despair. Whimsy inquired whether she had seen Miss Blundell that day. Only from the window, around 5:30. She was walking up the lane toward the vicarage. I thought she was limping. Limping? Not heavily, just favoring the left leg. She didn't usually limp, Parker clarified. No, in fact, she was quite proud of her posture. Said drooping spines were the first step toward national decay. Whimsy offered his thanks, but lingered outside the gate, gaze fixed upon a hedge top. 5:30, seen walking toward the garden. Limping. She may have been injured before she reached the herbs. Or perhaps, he added softly, she was not limping at all, but carrying something heavy in her left hand. They moved on to the village green. The constable had spoken with the boy delivering telegrams that day. Young Toby Mills, aged 15, bright-eyed and eager to matter. He had delivered a single note to Miss Blundell at around 4:50. Did she say anything when she took it? No, sir, only she looked sort of hard. Not angry, but tight, like when the squire's dog got into her lettuces. What was the name on the telegram? Didn't say. Just one of the paper slips, not a wire. I was told to hand it off and not ask. Back at the vicarage, Whimsy took a turn through the garden again. A breeze had picked up, the herbs whispered among themselves. He stopped abruptly beside the fennel bed. "Charles," he said, "come here." He pointed at the narrow paving stone walk that led from the side gate. "See this? There's no drag mark, no blood trail, which means she must have walked to the place she died, even if wounded. You think the telegram summoned her? I think it frightened her, and I think she came here believing she could confront someone, settle something, but not garden." He stooped again, fingers brushing the edge of a sage plant. "And more importantly, look here, a broken sprig, bent downward, not upward, trampled, not by her, the footprints too large. Another person was waiting. Quite. Possibly with a knife. Possibly hiding among the bee balm." They turned back toward the vicarage as the constable approached with a brown envelope in his hand. "Found this behind the garden shed, my lord, torn in half and stuffed into a flower pot." Whimsy took it delicately. It was the corner of a note, stained and crumpled. Only 3 words remained legible. "You were warned." He handed it to Parker without comment. Then, with a sudden brightening of tone, he added, "Charles, I do believe our dear Miss Blundell died as she lived, making enemies in alphabetical order." Parker sighed. "And now?" "Now," said Whimsy, adjusting his monocle, "we ask who among her acquaintances had grown tired of receiving unsolicited moral guidance, and, more importantly, who knew where to hide in the garden before the gate was ever unlatched. They walked back to the house. Behind them, the garden gate swung faintly on its iron hinges, latched but whispering secrets all the same. The evening had deepened, settling into a chill that seemed more fitting for November than the early days of spring. Whimsy and Parker made their way through the low-ceilinged corridors of the vicarage, where oil lamps cast wavering shadows on floral wallpaper and thick rugs muffled their footsteps. The household had retreated into uneasy quiet, each member nursing their own thoughts and suspicions. Whimsy, however, was far from contemplative repose. His mind, like an ancient engine, had begun to turn with precise determination. In the sitting room, Canon Weatherby had summoned his sister, Mrs. Edith Weatherby, a lady of formidable presence and the sort who seemed to regard any interruption as a personal affront. Her sharp eyes measured Whimsy as he took his seat, while Parker busied himself with the tea tray, which in this solemn hour felt almost an absurd intrusion. Edith's demeanor suggested she was ready to dispense judgment, not comfort. "So," she began, "you think the death was anything but accidental, Lord Peter? Miss Blundell was always a cautious woman. One would hardly imagine her stumbling over her own feet in the garden or falling victim to some random assailant." Whimsy inclined his head with a smile that was both respectful and gently ironic. "Accidents, my dear Mrs. Weatherby, are, I find, often the cover story for something far less fortuitous. The question is, who benefits from a dead gardener, and why?" Her lips pursed. "Certainly no one in this house." But benefit is not always financial or obvious. Sometimes it is the removal of an irritant, a thorn in the side, if you will. And Miss Blundell was precisely that, a thorn. She had no shortage of enemies, if reports are to be trusted. Edith drew herself up, expression hardening. "You would insinuate that any of us—" "On the contrary," Whimsy interrupted smoothly, "I merely observe that the village has many layers. People who smiled in public might scowl in private. Indeed, it is often the case that the most respectable faces hide the darkest grudges." Before she could reply, Parker interjected with the telegram fragment. "Lord Peter, I took the liberty of having the torn note examined. It appears the handwriting belongs to one C.E.R., a local known for her terse communications and occasional involvement in village affairs." Whimsy nodded, taking the fragment again, his monocle catching the lamplight. "Miss Elsie Rowntree, I believe, was the school mistress we met earlier. Intriguing. One wonders what quarrel of hers would require such an ominous warning." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. It opened to reveal Sergeant Harrington, a broad-shouldered man with a face perpetually reddened by the cold and exertion. "Begging pardon, my lord, but we've taken the liberty of questioning some of the villagers who might have had dealings with Miss Blundell. I thought it might interest you to know that a Mr. Ambrose Whitfield was seen near the garden about an hour before the body was found." "Whitfield?" Whimsy murmured. "The debt-ridden squire's nephew, I believe. His presence is far from reassuring." "Yes, sir," Harrington replied. "He claims he was there only to collect some documents Miss Blundell had promised him, relating to a family dispute. But his temper is known to be fiery, and he was overheard arguing with her a week prior." Whimsy's eyes twinkled with a mixture of amusement and calculation. A debt-ridden heir and an irascible gardener locked in verbal combat, a classic tableau, but I must confess, Sergeant, it is not yet enough to place him at the scene of a crime, much less make him the villain. Harrington looked unconvinced, but yielded to the detective's authority. Whimsy beckoned him to sit, then resumed his line of questioning, this time focusing on the household itself. He requested access to the servants' quarters, keen to probe beneath the polished veneer of propriety. Mrs. Rankin, still tense and watchful, allowed them to visit the scullery and the laundry. There, the whispers of gossip were thick but carefully guarded. A footman named James seemed particularly uneasy under Whimsy's scrutiny. "Did Miss Blundell have many visitors here of late?" Whimsy asked quietly, watching the young man's face closely. "Not many, sir," James muttered. "But sometimes the Reverend's niece would come by, late at night mostly. Folks said she was a bit of a mystery. A niece, you say? Yes, Miss Margaret Weatherby. She's been in London, but returned recently. Wimsey's interest piqued. And do you know if she and Miss Blundell were on particularly good terms? James hesitated, then shook his head. Not sure, but they didn't seem to like each other much. The detective's mind began to weave threads unseen by others. A family dispute, an ominous note, a mysterious niece, a debt-ridden nephew, a disgruntled schoolmistress, and a gardener with a sharp tongue and a sharper death. The pieces were numerous, but how they fitted was yet to be revealed. That night, after the household had retired, Wimsey sat alone in the vicarage library, the low fire casting flickering shadows on the rows of leather-bound volumes. He spread out his notes, the telegram fragment, the witness statements, the timelines, and set about re-examining them. He started with the arrival times. The telegram delivered just before 5, the sighting of Miss Blundell limping at 5:30, the claim of Mr. Whitfield's presence earlier in the afternoon. Something did not align. If Miss Blundell was warned and came to confront someone, why did she linger near the garden gate for so long? And who, indeed, could have hidden there to strike without being seen? Wimsey's gaze fell upon the garden plan drawn by the housekeeper. He traced the route of the narrow stone path, the thick clusters of herbs, the high hedge that bordered the lane. A perfect place to lie, in wait. And the gate, still latched, suggested the attacker had access without needing to enter from outside. Suddenly, the earlier detail of the broken sprig near the fennel bed returned to him. It had been bent downwards, trampled, but by a large foot, not Miss Blundell's. A clue to the presence of a second person, but whose? He glanced again at the handwriting sample from the telegram. C.E.R. Elsie Rowntree. Was the schoolmistress warning Miss Blundell or threatening her? Or was the note itself a red herring planted to mislead? More puzzling still was the limp. The girl at the tea shop had described it as slight, possibly feigned. Had Miss Blundell attempted to appear vulnerable to coax her assailant into complacency? Or was she concealing something heavier in her left hand, as suggested by Wimsey's earlier observation? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sharp rap on the library door. Parker entered, bearing a small bundle of papers. I took the liberty of asking around the village some more, my lord. Seems the Reverend's niece, Miss Margaret, had a rather stormy relationship with the deceased. Neighbours reported hearing loud arguments between them in recent days. Wimsey smiled faintly. Indeed, Charles, family quarrels have a curious way of breeding ill will, especially when inheritance and reputation are at stake. He leaned back, rubbing his chin. We must meet Miss Margaret Weatherby soon. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, as if the house itself whispered of secrets yet unspoken. The garden gate remained latched, silent sentinel to a mystery that was far from solved. And as Wimsey settled into the night's quiet contemplation, the dance of shadows and suspicion only grew more intricate. The following morning dawned cold and grey, the kind of weather that seemed to seep through the very walls of the vicarage, chilling the bones and sharpening the senses. Wimsey had resolved to see Miss Margaret Weatherby at once. The niece, a woman in her late 20s with a complexion too pale for her years and eyes that flickered with a restless fire, was lodging at the village inn. It was a brief carriage ride, the rutted lane flanked by gnarled hedgerows shrouded in mist. The inn's parlour was a cramped, stuffy room heavy with the smell of damp wool and stale ale. Margaret sat by the window, fingers clenched around a cup of tea, as if it could steady the storm within her. She regarded Wimsey with a mixture of defiance and wary curiosity when he introduced himself. I'm told you and Miss Blundell were not exactly friends. Wimsey began gently, setting the tone with a slight smile. Might I ask what the source of your disagreements was? Margaret's lips twitched, half in a smile, half in scorn. We had our differences. She was obstinate. I suppose she saw herself as the guardian of this village's morals, while I preferred progress and change. Naturally, that did not sit well with her. Whimsy inclined his head. Village morals, you say? Was she concerned about someone in particular, or more broadly? Margaret's gaze flickered to the window as if the outside world might offer some refuge. She believed that certain influences were poisoning the community. I was one of those influences, I suppose. But I never wished her harm. Of course. Whimsy's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. And did you meet her on the evening of her death? Yes. Margaret's voice was steady, but a shadow passed over her face. I went to speak with her near the garden gate. She had received a threatening note, at least that's what she told me. I wanted to help, but she was too proud to accept assistance. A threatening note. Whimsy's interest deepened. Might I ask what it said? Margaret shook her head. I never saw it. She was secretive about it, but her manner was tense. She said it came from CER, Elsie Rowntree, the schoolmistress. Miss Blundell suspected Elsie of something, though I never understood what. Whimsy noted the initials with a slight nod. Intriguing. Miss Rowntree seems to be a figure involved in many threads of this tangled web. Margaret hesitated. There was one more thing. Miss Blundell told me she feared someone close to the family. She did not elaborate. Before Whimsy could press further, the innkeeper entered with a message. A telegram had arrived for Margaret, marked urgent. She broke the seal and read it quickly, her face paling. Whimsy caught a glimpse of the words "meet immediately" and "danger." Would you care to share this with me? Whimsy inquired suavely. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. It's from my solicitor in London. Apparently, there's been a development in the Weatherby estate. Something that requires my immediate attention. Whimsy's mind raced. The estate, the niece, the threatening note. All elements converging. I suggest, Miss Weatherby, that we proceed to the solicitor's office together. It would be unwise to face such matters alone. She agreed, and they took the carriage back to the village, the landscape now brightening as the morning fog lifted. The solicitor, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Pritchard, received them with grave urgency. He explained that new documents had surfaced, wills, codicils, and letters, that complicated the inheritance of the Weatherby estate and cast doubt on previous understandings. One particular letter, dated just 2 months prior, hinted at a secret pact between the late Reverend Weatherby and a mysterious individual named E.S., a figure unknown to the family, but apparently involved in financial dealings that could threaten the estate's solvency. Whimsy asked to see the letter. It was penned in a florid hand, full of legal jargon and obscure references to bonds and land rights. But the signature was peculiar. An interlaced E and S that did not match any known correspondent. This, Whimsy mused, may be the key to understanding the motivations behind the threats, and indeed the murder itself. Mr. Pritchard agreed, but cautioned that the full implications were not yet clear, as further investigation was required. Returning to the vicarage, Whimsy shared these revelations with Parker and Mrs. Rankin, who listened with growing unease. The domestic calm was a fragile facade, and now cracks were appearing everywhere. Whimsy decided the next logical step was to confront Miss Elsie Rowntree, the schoolmistress, whose involvement remained ambiguous. She was found at the village school, a small stone building with creeping ivy and dusty windows. Elsie was a slender woman with sharp features and eyes that darted nervously when questioned. I hear you sent a threatening note to Miss Blundell, Whimsy began, producing the telegram fragment. Care to explain? Elsie's face hardened. Threatening. I assure you, Lord Peter, the note was a warning, a caution against meddling in affairs beyond her comprehension. Ah, but such warnings can be interpreted as threats, Whimsy replied smoothly, especially when followed by a violent death. She bristled. Miss Blundell was stubborn and nosy. She sought to expose certain truths that would have brought ruin to this village. I tried to protect us all. Truth and protection often come at odds, Whimsy remarked. And yet, who benefits if Miss Blundell is silenced? Elsie's gaze dropped. I do not know. Whimsy noted the ambiguity with interest, but sensed her words were more evasive than outright deceitful. As he left the schoolhouse, Whimsy's thoughts turned again to the garden gate. Latched tight, yet guarding a secret, he decided a closer examination was warranted. Returning to the scene, he inspected the latch and the surrounding foliage with an almost obsessive attention to detail. The gate's position meant that anyone exiting would have to unlatch it, yet it was found firmly secured on the morning of the murder. A curious inconsistency. If the assailant escaped through the gate, how was it found latched? Further scrutiny revealed a slender wire cleverly looped through the latch mechanism, an ingenious device allowing the gate to be released from a distance and then resealed. Such craftsmanship indicated a level of premeditation. Whimsy's mind replayed the timeline. The late telegram, the sightings near the gate, the mysterious figures. Someone had prepared the scene carefully, manipulating appearances to mislead both police and witnesses. He recalled Mrs. Rankin's earlier comment about a second gatekeeper, James, the footman, who had access to all entrances. Could he have been an unwitting accomplice or a deliberate conspirator? Whimsy resolved to speak with James again, this time privately and with direct questions about his movements the previous evening. Under the gentle pressure of Whimsy's interrogation, James faltered, revealing a secret errand to the garden shortly before the body was discovered. He claimed to have been delivering a message from the Reverend, but his nervousness betrayed something else. Whimsy considered the possibility that James had been used to create an alibi or to distract attention from the true murderer. Back in the vicarage drawing room, the detective gathered the key players. He laid out the discoveries. The forged telegram, the mysterious signatures, the secret will, the ingenious gate mechanism, and the inconsistencies in testimonies. His eyes flickered nervously. Whimsy allowed the tension to build, a faint smile playing on his lips. The truth, he said softly, is often hidden behind layers of deliberate deception and human frailty. The garden gate, so carefully latched, was both a symbol and a trap. Someone sought to control the narrative, to manipulate time and space, and to ensure that their crime was concealed beneath a veneer of respectability. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. But human nature is rarely so accommodating. Pride, fear, and greed conspire to unravel even the most cunning schemes. And so, I invite you all to reflect on who among you had the most to gain and the cleverness to enact such a plan. The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken accusations and barely suppressed anxiety. Outside, the wind whispered through the ancient trees, as if urging the next move in this delicate and deadly game. Whimsy knew the puzzle was far from complete, but the pieces were steadily assembling into a picture that only he could see in full. The game was afoot, and the shadows lengthened accordingly. Whimsy's invitation to reflection lingered in the air, like the faintest scent of a vanished perfume. Subtle, elusive, yet impossible to ignore. The assembled group exchanged glances, some nervous, others taut with unspoken challenge. For all the calm surface of the vicarage drawing room, beneath it stirred currents of unease, suspicion, and a keenly felt vulnerability. After a brief pause, Mrs. Rankin busied herself by refilling teacups, her eyes darting about the room with practiced discretion. It was she who first broke the silence. Lord Peter, you spoke of the cleverness required to stage such a deception. But I must confess, the more I think on it, the more the whole affair seems tangled in human weaknesses rather than brilliance. Whimsy inclined his head with a faint smile. Quite right, Mrs. Rankin. Genius often resides not in complexity, but in the subtle exploitation of ordinary flaws. It is precisely these human frailties I find so intriguing. Turning his attention back to James, the footman, Wimsey pressed further. You spoke of delivering a message from the Reverend to Miss Blundell on that fateful evening. Could you specify the time? James swallowed hard, avoiding Wimsey's gaze. Just before dusk, sir. Perhaps around 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, Wimsey repeated thoughtfully. And did you notice anything unusual in the garden or nearby? No, sir. It was quiet. Miss Blundell was alone near the gate, as I recall. Wimsey nodded slowly. Alone, you say? Was there anyone else about? James hesitated, then muttered, Well, I thought I saw Mr. Weatherby near the old orchard path. The name drew a slight reaction from the room. Edward Weatherby, the vicar's nephew, was known for his temper and frequent disagreements with his aunt. A likely suspect, if ever there was one. Very well, Wimsey said, filing this away. Mr. Weatherby was seen near the orchard around the time Miss Blundell was last seen alive. This is a lead we must pursue. Later, in the solitude of the study, Wimsey sat by the fireplace, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The puzzle was a shifting mosaic. Each new fragment raised questions as much as it answered them. The forged telegram, the secret correspondence with the elusive ES, the intricate gate mechanism, the tangled family ties, all wove together into a complex tapestry of deceit. He retrieved the letter from the solicitor's files and scrutinized it once more. The florid script masked a financial arrangement of considerable subtlety. A loan secured on Weatherby lands, with interest compounded monthly. The signer, E.S., was evidently someone who wielded influence and harbored designs on the estate. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock. Parker entered, a small parcel in hand. Sir, this arrived for you this morning. It was found tucked behind a loose brick in the garden wall near the gate. Wimsey took the parcel with a raised eyebrow and carefully unfolded the contents. Inside was a crude drawing of the garden layout, marked with cryptic annotations and a single word: Truth. Beneath it, a note penned in an unsteady hand. You look, but do not see. The answer lies where the shadows fall and the clock lies still. Wimsey's eyes gleamed. Ah, Parker, a riddle. How delightful. He rose and paced to the window, peering out at the garden now shrouded in a thin veil of fog. The clock lies still intrigued him. There was an old sundial in the garden, but sundials do not lie still except at night. Or so the saying went. Perhaps a clock inside the house? He made a mental note to examine the old grandfather clock that had remained oddly silent since the murder. The following afternoon, Wimsey requested to see the clock in question. The vicar led him to a dim corner of the drawing-room where an imposing grandfather clock stood sentinel. Its face was ornate, Roman numerals carved in brass, hands frozen at precisely 7:12. Has it stopped for long? Wimsey inquired. Since the night of the murder, the vicar replied. We assumed it was coincidence, or perhaps a message, Wimsey mused, a frozen moment in time pointing to an event or alibi. He examined the clockwork with a jeweler's loupe, noting the mechanism's state. Nothing appeared broken. Rather, the clock had been deliberately halted. Someone wanted to mark the moment, Wimsey concluded. Later, cross-referencing the timeline, Wimsey noted that the clock's frozen hands aligned with James's delivery, timed to Miss Blundell and the reported sighting of Edward Weatherby near the orchard. The detective's mind circled the possibility that the murder occurred at this exact time. But if so, why had the body been discovered hours later? He turned to the gardener, Mr. Collins, who had been silent throughout the investigation but whose presence could no longer be overlooked. The man was a gaunt figure, his hands rough from toil, his gaze steady. Mr. Collins, Wimsey said, can you account for your whereabouts on the evening in question? Collins nodded. I was tending to the greenhouse until dusk, sir. After that, I went to the village for supplies. Did you notice anyone unusual in the garden? No, sir. Only the usual sounds. The wind in the trees, the owls. It was quiet. "Did you see Miss Blundell after 7 o'clock?" "No. I'd already left the grounds by then." Whimsy felt a flicker of doubt. The gardener's silence was too neat, too practiced. Turning once more to the peculiar drawing and its cryptic note, Whimsy realized that the phrase, "where the shadows fall," might indicate a location in the garden that was deliberately obscured from common sight. With Parker's assistance, Whimsy began a methodical search of the garden, following the sketch. Their attention settled on a cluster of yew trees near the boundary wall, where the shadows lengthened even in daylight. Beneath the twisted roots, hidden beneath fallen leaves, they uncovered a small, rusted tin box. Inside were letters, correspondence between the Reverend and the mysterious E.S. The letters revealed a bitter quarrel over money, land rights, and threats of exposure. Among the letters was a final note, jaggedly torn, but still legible. "If I must fall, then you shall fall with me." Whimsy's gaze darkened. The murder was no impulsive act, but a calculated strike born of desperation and vengeance. As dusk fell once again, Whimsy gathered those involved for a discreet meeting in the vicarage library. He spoke quietly, deliberately. "The evidence points not to a moment of passion, but to a long simmering grudge. The game has shifted from speculation to motive, from shadow to substance." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "Tomorrow we shall pursue the identity of E.S., and with it, the key to this tangled mystery." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows as the village settled into uneasy silence. Within the walls of the vicarage, secrets whispered in the dark, waiting for the final unraveling. The dawn cast a pale, misty light over the village of Netherbyre as Lord Peter Whimsy took a slow, deliberate walk through the dew-soaked garden. The fog clung to the earth like a secret, blurring the edges of familiar shapes and lending the trees an eerie stillness. It was the kind of morning that invited speculation, the sort of silence that whispered truths concealed by daylight. Whimsy paused at the yew trees where the rusted tin box had been found the night before. The discovery of the correspondence between Reverend Blundell and the enigmatic E.S. had shifted the investigation from mere curiosity to something far more sinister. The letters revealed a tapestry of bitterness, financial entanglements, and threats of mutual ruin, a drama played out on paper with the grim inevitability of tragedy. Yet the identity of E.S. remained elusive, a shadow lurking just beyond reach. Back inside the vicarage, the household was already stirring. The vicar's austere study was cluttered with papers, and the fading smell of tobacco smoke as Whimsy set about reviewing every scrap of information at his disposal. Parker placed fresh coffee and toast beside him, a tacit acknowledgement that the day promised long hours. "The letters suggest a man of some standing," Whimsy mused aloud, scanning a particularly acrid note. E.S. speaks with the confidence of one who wields influence, yet his hand trembles beneath the weight of a secret. Parker raised an eyebrow. "You think it's someone local?" "Likely," Whimsy replied. "The references to the estate, to land rights and interest, imply close ties, but we must look beyond the obvious. A man who writes threats with such venom is either desperate or supremely confident he will not be discovered." Whimsy's thoughts turned to Edward Weatherby, the vicar's nephew and a man of considerable temper and ambition. Weatherby's known debts and recent disputes over inheritance made him a prime candidate for such duplicity. But was he E.S., or merely a pawn? Before Whimsy could delve deeper, a sharp rap at the door announced the arrival of Constable Farrow, a sturdy man with an unyielding respect for Lord Peter's reputation. "Good morning, my lord," Farrow greeted, removing his cap with a slight flourish. "I've been to the village post office. There's no record of any telegram sent to Miss Blundell from the vicar or anywhere else on the evening in question." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "No telegram at all?" Then the forged message was not merely a clever ruse, but a deliberate attempt to mislead the investigation. Indeed, sir, Farrow agreed. And the postmaster mentioned a stranger came through the village 2 nights ago, a man asking questions about the Blundell estate. A visitor, Wimsey said, his interest piqued. Was he described? Middle-aged, dark hair, with a distinct limp on his left leg. Wimsey made a note. An inconvenient detail, but invaluable nonetheless. Someone preparing the ground, no doubt. He paced the room, steepling his fingers once more. The forged telegram, the secret correspondence, the mysterious visitor, each thread wove into a more tangled skein. Yet the underlying motive seemed clear, control over the estate and the ruin of Reverend Blundell. With a nod to Farrow, Wimsey said, "Keep the visitor under observation. We must learn who he is and what he seeks." Later, as the afternoon sun fought its way through breaking clouds, Wimsey arranged a meeting with Edward Weatherby under the guise of discussing the estate's affairs. The vicarage's drawing room felt stifling, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Weatherby arrived, his expression dark and wary. "Lord Peter, I trust this is about my aunt's unfortunate demise." "Quite," Wimsey replied smoothly. "I understand you had a rather heated disagreement with her recently." Weatherby's jaw clenched. "Family disputes are hardly uncommon. That hardly makes me a murderer." "Of course not," Wimsey said lightly. "But I must ask, where were you on the evening of the 12th? Weatherby hesitated, then said, "I was in the village pub until nearly 10. Several can attest to that. And yet James saw you near the orchard at about 7. Weatherby's face twitched. "I might have gone for a walk. I needed air." Wimsey's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement. "An evening stroll, then? Alone?" "Yes." "Do you often take solitary walks in the orchard at dusk?" "No more than anyone else." The conversation hung in a fragile balance, with Weatherby's evasions casting long shadows. That evening, while the household settled into uneasy quiet, Wimsey and Parker explored the orchard by lantern light. The ground was soft, imprinted with the faintest tracks leading toward the garden gate. Wimsey bent to examine them closely. "Curious," he murmured. "These footprints seem recent, but there is an absence of others. Whoever passed this way did not want to be noticed." Parker nodded. "It might explain why no one else saw him." "Precisely." Wimsey's gaze swept the twisted branches overhead. A clandestine meeting, or perhaps a hurried escape. Back inside, Wimsey inspected the garden gate's intricate latch mechanism. It was a masterpiece of Victorian craftsmanship, designed to appear simple while concealing a subtle lock within. A device that, if manipulated correctly, could allow the gate to be latched or unlatched without the usual sound or visible indication. Mrs. Rankin mentioned the gate was latched when she found Miss Blundell's body, Wimsey said thoughtfully. Yet James says he saw the gate open earlier that evening. "This suggests someone relatched it deliberately," Parker observed. "And to hide their passage," Wimsey concluded. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but the picture was still blurred. Who had the knowledge and skill to manipulate such a mechanism? Who had motive and opportunity to stage the scene? The next morning, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Rankin, summoned again for questioning, mentioned a small detail she had previously dismissed: a broken cufflink found near the garden path. "It was silver, with an engraving," she said. "I thought it belonged to one of the men, perhaps Mr. Weatherby." Wimsey asked to see it. The cufflink was simple but elegant, bearing the initials E.S., the same as the mysterious correspondent. He examined it under the lamp. A telling clue indeed. "Does this mean our visitor is E.S.?" Parker queried. "Not necessarily," Wimsey replied, "but it narrows the field. Someone bearing these initials was present on the grounds, possibly engaged in more than idle conversation." Later that day, Whimsy dispatched Parker to discreetly inquire about any local men with the initials E.S. who might fit the visitor's description. Meanwhile, Whimsy revisited the torn letter from the tin box. The phrase, "If I must fall, then you shall fall with me," struck a chord. It spoke of mutual destruction, a pact sealed in bitterness. He reflected on the relationships tangled around the Blundell estate. The vicar's strained ties to his nephew, his unknown dealings with E.S., the secretive visitor, and the sudden appearance of forged telegrams. As evening settled, Whimsy found himself once again at the garden gate, the autumn chill pressing upon him. The shadows lengthened and deepened, and the faint rustle of leaves whispered secrets he was determined to unravel. Tomorrow promised revelations, but for now, the garden kept its silence, and the mystery waited patiently for the light. The morning mist had barely lifted when Parker returned, his face a study in professional restraint, though his eyes betrayed a hint of excitement. "Lord Peter, I have news. There is a local solicitor by the name of Edwin Swithin, middle-aged, limping on the left leg from a riding accident some years back. He's been known in these parts for years, though he keeps to himself." Whimsy folded his hands, a faint smile playing about his lips. "A splendid piece of deduction, Parker. The initials, the limp. Edwin Swithin fits our visitor's description admirably. Have you managed to learn anything else? The villagers speak cautiously of him. He owns some land adjoining the Blundell estate and has recently been embroiled in a dispute over boundary lines. Some say he was none too pleased with the Reverend's recent plans to expand his orchard. Boundary disputes often foment the most civilized of quarrels, Whimsy remarked dryly, and in our experience, also the most dangerous. Whimsy decided it was time to pay Mr. Swithin a visit. The solicitor's residence was a modest, ivy-clad cottage perched near the edge of the village, its windows darkened by heavy drapes. Upon arrival, Whimsy noted the faint scent of pipe tobacco mingling with damp earth and the subdued creak of floorboards as a butler, an austere man with a penchant for minimal speech, led him inside. Edwin Swithin was seated behind a large oak desk, his dark eyes sharp beneath a brow that was perpetually furrowed, betraying a mind always at work. His left leg was supported by a well-worn brace, causing a slight unevenness to his gait. He regarded Whimsy coolly, but without hostility. "Lord Peter Whimsy, I presume?" Swithin said crisply. "I've heard whispers of your inquiries." "I find whispers a most useful form of communication, Mr. Swithin," Whimsy replied with a courteous bow. "However, it seems some whispers have taken a rather dark turn." Swithin's eyes hardened. "You imply I had some involvement with the late Miss Blundell." "Merely that you had both motive and opportunity to ensure her silence." Swithin's hand tightened around his pen. "I have no quarrel with Miss Blundell, though I admit my dealings with her uncle were sometimes strained." Whimsy leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Strained enough to provoke threats, perhaps, or to write bitter letters signed E.S. The room fell into a heavy silence. Then Swithin's voice dropped, almost grudging. "I did write to Reverend Blundell, yes, to protest his expansion plans, but threats? No. I'm a man of law, not violence." "Yet a forged telegram was sent, intended to mislead and manipulate," Whimsy pressed. "Do you deny any knowledge of that?" Swithin's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I can neither confirm nor deny what I do not know, but I'm aware that appearances can be deceiving." The conversation, though unyielding, gave Whimsy little concrete to go on. He thanked Swithin and departed, his mind turning over the subtle intricacies of the man's demeanor. The solicitor's polished exterior cloaked a core of resolute ambition, perhaps even desperation. Returning to the vicarage, Whimsy found Parker waiting with fresh reports. "There's been talk in the village," Parker said. "Some claim to have seen a figure near the orchard the night of the murder, a woman in a dark cloak moving quickly and silently." A woman? Whimsy echoed, intrigued. That complicates matters. And there's more, Parker continued. Mrs. Rankin mentioned the vicar's housekeeper, Miss Agnes Lowther, seemed unusually nervous during questioning. She clutched a locket tightly, refusing to part with it. Whimsy mused aloud. A nervous housekeeper, a mysterious woman, a forged telegram, and a solicitor with a limp. The threads multiply as the tapestry darkens. Later that afternoon, Whimsy arranged a discreet meeting with Agnes Lowther in the vicarage's conservatory. The glass panels framed a bleak landscape, grey skies lending a somber tone. Agnes entered hesitantly, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the locket. Whimsy studied her carefully, pale, with sharp features softened by a lingering sadness and eyes that darted nervously. "Miss Lowther," Whimsy began gently, "I understand these times have been difficult for you." She nodded, swallowing hard. "It's all so dreadful, Lord Peter. Miss Blundell was kind to me, but lately things were strange. Reverend Blundell was not himself. There were letters, secret letters, and she seemed frightened." "Frightened of whom?" Whimsy asked. "I don't know," Agnes whispered. "There was a visitor, someone she met in secret. She kept the locket I gave her when she was a child, but I don't know if it had meaning beyond that." "May I see the locket?" Agnes hesitated but handed it over. The locket was simple, silver with a faint engraving on the back. Whimsy took out his hand lens and examined it closely. "An initial," he observed quietly. "But not hers. E.L." Agnes's eyes widened. "I never noticed. E.L. was my mother's initials. She died years ago." Whimsy's thoughts raced. Could this locket be a key to understanding Miss Blundell's hidden fears? Was the mysterious visitor connected to Agnes's family? As the shadows lengthened outside, Whimsy's inquiries returned to the forged telegram. Someone with intimate knowledge of the household's routines had crafted it. The timing, the wording. It was designed to mislead not only the police but the family as well. That evening, Whimsy and Parker retraced the vicarage grounds by lantern light. The air was chill and the stillness pressed heavily. "Notice anything peculiar about the windows here?" Whimsy asked, stopping before the study window. Parker peered closely. "The latch looks undisturbed." "Yet it was open the night of the murder," Whimsy said, "unless the killer was careful to close it behind them." He pointed to a faint smudge on the glass. "A glove, perhaps?" Parker nodded slowly. "It suggests someone entered or exited through the window without drawing attention." Whimsy's eyes gleamed. "And someone who knew precisely how to avoid detection." Returning inside, Whimsy reviewed his notes and timelines. The forged telegram, the broken cufflink, the mysterious visitor, Agnes's locket, all pointed to a complex web of secrets and misdirection. A single truth remained. Beneath the polite veneer of nether bile, passions and resentments festered, waiting to be unearthed. As the clock chimed midnight, Whimsy allowed himself a wry smile. The game was afoot, and the solution lay tantalizingly close, hidden in plain sight, like the garden gate that had been latched when all should have been open. Whimsy awoke to the soft patter of rain against the window pane, a reminder that the English countryside was often as inscrutable as the puzzles it concealed. Dressing swiftly, he resolved to revisit the vicarage and examine anew the study window where the faint glove print had stirred his curiosity. There was a particular precision about that entry point, a carefulness that bespoke familiarity. Whoever had traversed it was no casual intruder. Upon arrival, Parker was already there, poring over a weathered map of the estate. "Morning, my lord," he said, folding the map with a glance toward Whimsy. "I've been charting the possible routes from the garden to the study window. It seems a narrow path skirts the hedgerow, hidden from view except to those who know where to look." Whimsy nodded, adjusting his spectacles. "A path known, perhaps, to the household or frequent visitors. We must consider who might have had such intimate knowledge, and why they chose this furtive approach. They approached the window, and Whimsy crouched to inspect the glass more closely. The faint smudge remained, a muted fingerprint, possibly left by a gloved hand. "Notice, Parker," he murmured. "The imprint is partial, and the glove must have been fine leather, supple enough to retain the pattern, but also thin, allowing the wearer dexterity." He glanced upward at the narrow lattice of the window frame. Opening and closing this window would require a degree of practice, a familiarity, or perhaps a physical characteristic permitting ease of movement here. "Like the limping solicitor, perhaps?" Parker ventured. "Precisely," Whimsy replied with a faint smile. "Mr. Swithin's handicap might make such an acrobatic ingress less plausible, though not impossible. But we should also consider those whose tasks routinely require them to move about the house discreetly." As they spoke, the housekeeper, Agnes Lowther, approached quietly, her hands clasped nervously. "Lord Peter, there is something I forgot to mention last night," she said, her voice low and trembling. "Miss Blundell had been receiving letters, secret letters, delivered by hand. She never showed them to anyone." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "Delivered by hand, you say? Do you know who the messenger was?" Agnes shook her head. "No, but I heard voices in the garden late at night just before her death. 2 people speaking in hushed tones. I didn't dare listen, but the tone was urgent." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Parker. "Urgency in the dead of night suggests a matter of great importance, or great fear. Could it have been the visitor you mentioned, Parker? The woman in the cloak?" "Possibly," Parker said, "but we have no idea who she was, or what her connection might be." Whimsy stood thoughtfully. "We must learn more about these letters and the nighttime meetings. Secrets seldom remain buried long in places like Nether Byre." Later, Whimsy visited the village post office, where he inquired about recent letters sent to or from Miss Blundell. The postmistress, a stout woman with sharp eyes, recalled a peculiar parcel delivered anonymously the day before the murder. It was a small wooden box, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with black wax. "Did anyone claim it?" Whimsy asked. "No, my lord. It was left at the vicarage doorstep. Reverend Blundell himself seemed unsettled by it," she replied. Curious, Whimsy requested to see the box. The postmistress produced a note left with the parcel. "For your eyes only. Truth lies within." The message was unsigned and the handwriting elegant but unfamiliar. Back at the vicarage, Whimsy examined the box. Its surface was intricately carved with ivy and roses, symbols often associated with secrecy and mourning. Opening it revealed a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon, along with a small, tarnished key. The letters were yellowed and brittle, penned in a neat, precise hand. Whimsy recognized the initials E.L. on the envelope seals. The correspondence dated back decades, chronicling a hidden relationship between Edwin Swithin and a woman named Eleanor, whose identity remained elusive. Reading through the letters, Whimsy discerned a story of love thwarted by circumstance, of promises broken and sacrifices made. But one letter stood out, recent and tinged with desperation. It spoke of a plan to reveal a long-buried secret that could alter the future of the Blundell estate. Evidently, Mr. Swithin's past entangles deeply with the present mystery, Whimsy mused. The key, too. There must be a lock it fits, somewhere nearby. Parker assisted in a search of the vicarage, and in the recesses of the study fireplace mantel they found a small concealed compartment. The key fit perfectly. Inside lay a folded document bearing a faded seal. Unfolding it carefully, Whimsy discovered a will, one superseding the known, testament of Reverend Blundell. This new will stipulated that, in the event of Miss Blundell's death without issue, the estate would pass to an heir unknown to the family, a descendant of Eleanor. Whimsy's brow furrowed. A motive, then, clearer than ever, to prevent this revelation at all costs. That evening, Wimsey requested a final audience with Edwin Swithin. The solicitor received him with an air of wary acceptance. "I have uncovered the letters, the key, and the will," Wimsey stated plainly. "You cannot deny your involvement in these matters." Swithin's gaze dropped, conflicted. "I sought only to protect what I believed was rightfully mine, and to keep the family peace. But secrets such as these, Mr. Swithin, have a way of surfacing, do they not? And when they do, they often demand a price." The solicitor's composure faltered for a moment before he recovered with a sigh. "I admit I confronted Miss Blundell, but I would never harm her." Wimsey smiled thinly. "Nor did you need to. Someone else, perhaps, sought to silence her, and you provided the perfect distraction." As the night deepened, Wimsey prepared to reveal the final piece of the puzzle. The threads of jealousy, deception, and hidden lineage had woven a tangled web, but the heart of the matter was at last within his grasp. He glanced once more at the rain-streaked window, the faint imprint of a glove still etched in his mind. The truth, like the elusive visitor cloaked in shadow, was about to step into the light. Wimsey's thoughts lingered on the solicitor's confession, or rather his denial of direct violence, as he stepped out into the moist evening air. The vicarage garden, shrouded in mist, seemed to breathe secrets with every rustle of leaves and drip of water. Something still felt amiss. The will, the letters, the mysterious visitor. They formed a dense thicket of motives and means, but the actual execution of the crime remained obscure. Returning indoors, Wimsey's mind turned to the faint, lingering detail that had troubled him since the outset. The glove print on the study window. A peculiarity, yes, but more importantly, a clue to the perpetrator's mannerisms and perhaps their identity. It was unusual for the glove to be left behind. Killers usually erased all traces, especially those who had planned with such care. Was it a sign of haste or deliberate oversight, or a psychological slip? Wimsey dismissed the notion that it was mere negligence. More likely, the glove was a token, a signature of sorts. He recalled the vague reference to secret letters and night meetings. Someone had intended their presence to be known, or at least for certain eyes to discover the truth, albeit in a cryptic manner. The evening unfolded with the arrival of Miss Maud Dorrance, the niece of Reverend Blundell's late wife. She had remained conspicuously absent during the earlier days of the inquiry, her silence a curious anomaly. As she entered, draped in a deep velvet cloak that seemed to absorb the room's dim candlelight, her eyes fixed on Wimsey with a mixture of apprehension and defiance. "My lord," she began with a measured voice, "I understand you are delving into matters better left undisturbed. The Blundell family has had its share of sorrow, but we must not turn every shadow into a spectre." Wimsey inclined his head politely but did not soften his gaze. "On the contrary, Miss Dorrance, it is the shadows we neglect that often conceal the sharpest knives. You have been reticent, but reticence in times like these breeds suspicion." She drew a delicate handkerchief from her muff and dabbed at her eyes. "I mourn my aunt, and I loved my uncle dearly, yet I fear that in unearthing old scandals, you dishonor their memory." "Sometimes," Wimsey replied quietly. "Honor demands the uncovering of truth, no matter how painful. Now, if you will indulge me, there are questions that require answers." The conversation turned to the late Mrs. Blundell's correspondence and her relationships within the village. Maud confessed that her aunt had been troubled in recent months, withdrawn and secretive, often retreating to the garden to speak with an unidentified visitor. A visitor who, according to Maud, may have held sway over some family secrets. "Do you know this visitor's name?" Wimsey inquired. Maud hesitated, then whispered, "I suspect it was Eleanor, but how she came to be here after all these years, I cannot say." The mention of Eleanor's name so long buried in time, sent a ripple of recognition through Whimsy's thoughts. The missing piece of the puzzle was taking shape, too. Eleanor was not merely a figure from the past, but perhaps a living, breathing agent in the present drama. Later, Whimsy requested a quiet walk through the garden, accompanied only by Parker. The garden gate, ironically, remained latched from the outside, an enigma in itself. If the gate was locked, how did the visitor enter and leave unnoticed? Inspecting the lock closely, Whimsy found the faintest scratch marks near the keyhole, indicating a pick attempt, or at least a practiced manipulation. This, he mused, requires skill and patience. The visitor was no ordinary intruder. They retraced the visitor's supposed path to the study window where the glove print lingered. "Notice, Parker," Whimsy whispered, "the slight scuff on the brickwork here. Someone scrambled up hastily, yet the glove was left behind deliberately, a calculated risk." Returning indoors, Whimsy summoned the household staff individually, observing their mannerisms, testing their recollections, and noting discrepancies. The butler, a man named Giles, proved particularly evasive when questioned about the garden's comings and goings. "Mr. Giles," Whimsy pressed gently, "I understand the household runs like clockwork, yet even the best clocks can falter." Giles stiffened, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "I assure you, my lord, nothing unusual has occurred. The garden gates are locked at dusk, as always." "But what of Miss Blundell's late-night meetings?" Whimsy asked, eyes sharp. "I was not present, my lord," Giles replied, voice low. "But I trust my employers implicitly." Whimsy smiled thinly. Trust is a rare currency in these affairs. The cook, Mrs. Pierce, provided a contrasting tone, a flood of nervous chatter about whispered voices, late footsteps on gravel, and an odd woman seen gliding through the garden in a cloak. She seemed spectral, my lord, but no ghost I've ever heard of. Spectral indeed, Whimsy mused. The very air of the Gothic, yet grounded firmly in reality. As the night deepened, Whimsy's mind circled back to the newly discovered will. Its existence suggested someone had reason to conceal the true heir and to act with lethal determination. Then, as if summoned by the very shadows that clung to the walls, an unexpected visitor arrived. Miss Eleanor herself, or so she claimed. The woman who stepped into the dim light was not the ghostly figure of legend, but a resolute, composed presence. Her eyes bore the weight of years and secrets, and her voice was calm, though edged with steel. "I have come," she said, "to claim what is rightfully mine, and to clear the air of lies and deceit." Whimsy regarded her carefully, noting the precision of her speech, the quiet authority that seemed to fill the room. "Miss Eleanor, your timing is impeccable. Pray do tell us your side of this tangled tale." She began to speak, revealing a tale of love and betrayal, of promises broken and identities hidden. Her story confirmed the truths glimpsed in the letters, but also unveiled new layers of complexity, a tangled web of familial duty and personal sacrifice. As her words unfolded, the puzzle pieces aligned with a clarity that illuminated the darker corners of Netherbyre. Yet, even as the narrative crystallized, Whimsy sensed the final, most elusive piece awaited. Somewhere in the minutiae, among the clocks misaligned, the curtains disturbed, and the locked garden gate, lay the key to the murderer's identity. The game was far from over, and the final act loomed, promising revelation and, perhaps, justice. The drawing room was heavy with a silence that seemed to press against the very walls, a silence charged with the weight of unspoken truths and carefully guarded resentments. Eleanor's arrival had shifted the atmosphere as palpably as a sudden storm blowing through a stifling summer afternoon. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked steadily, its sound oddly amplified in the stillness, as if marking the slow, inevitable approach of revelation. Lord Peter Wimsey, seated comfortably yet alert, regarded Eleanor with that characteristic mix of detached curiosity and sharpened intellect. "Miss Eleanor," he began, his voice smooth but edged with steel, "your story, though compelling, raises more questions than it answers. I hope you will forgive my impertinence if I say that truth, like good Latin, must be precise, lest it be misunderstood or, worse, misrepresented." Eleanor's eyes flickered with a momentary shadow of annoyance, but she masked it quickly. "I anticipated as much, Lord Peter. I am prepared to answer your inquiries so long as they are made in good faith." "And they shall be," Wimsey assured her. "Let us commence, then, with your movements on the night in question. You claim to have come to claim your inheritance, yet the garden gate was latched from the outside, locked securely. How did you gain entry without disturbing the household?" Her gaze narrowed slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I arrived before dusk and waited near the tool shed, where the side door is less guarded. Giles, the butler, has a habit of leaving it unlatched during his rounds, a minor oversight that granted me entry." Wimsey's eyes twinkled. "An interesting detail, Miss Eleanor, yet Giles denies such negligence." "Denials are easy, Lord Peter, when one fears the consequences of truth." She leaned forward, folding her hands tightly. "Giles is loyal to the Blundell name, but loyalty can breed silence, not honesty." The butler's visage darkened as he listened from the adjoining doorway, where he had quietly re-entered unnoticed. Wimsey's gaze shifted briefly toward him, but did not accuse outright. Instead, he continued with his line of inquiry. "Your presence near the study window was noted. A glove print remains. How do you explain that?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, then she answered with a quiet candor that suggested a calculated choice. "I touched the window to peer inside, to confirm the absence of anyone who might oppose my claim. It was an impulsive act, born of anxiety." "A glove left behind is rarely an impulse," Wimsey said softly. "It is either a sign of carelessness or a deliberate token. I incline to the latter in this case." The room seemed to close in as the air thickened with tension. Miss Maud Dorrance, sitting stiffly beside the window, cleared her throat. "If I may interject, Lord Peter, Eleanor has not been alone in her nocturnal visits. Several times my aunt was seen speaking with a man unknown to us, a figure shrouded in mystery and shadows." Wimsey's brows lifted imperceptibly. "A man, you say? Might this figure have motives as complex as the lady herself?" Maud nodded. "I believe so, and I suspect this man had reasons to silence my aunt permanently." The revelation stirred a ripple among those assembled. Wimsey's mind raced, fitting this new piece into the already intricate mosaic. A second visitor, unknown but possibly complicit, could explain several anomalies: the conflicting timelines, the unexplained sounds in the night, the missing salver from the study. "And this man," Wimsey pressed, "have you any notion of his identity?" "No," Maud confessed. "Only fleeting glimpses, shadows glimpsed from behind curtains or across the garden paths." "Shadows and secrets," Wimsey murmured. "Very well. We must consider the possibility of a conspiracy, or at least a partnership, between those who sought to manipulate the Blundell estate." His attention turned again to Giles, whose face had darkened into an expression of reluctant confession. "Mr. Giles, your silence has been notable. Are you willing to explain your nocturnal activities?" The butler sighed, the weight of years evident in the gesture. "I feared to speak, my lord, but since matters have reached this point, I confess I observed the meetings between Mrs. Blundell and a man, a solicitor named Harcourt. They spoke in hushed tones about a new will and secrets that might ruin the family name." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "And on the night of the murder?" "I saw Miss Eleanor lurking near the tool shed, as she said. But I also heard a struggle near the study window. Voices raised briefly, then silence. Silence fell again, heavier this time as the implications settled like dust on ancient tomes. Whimsy paced slowly, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes alight with the quiet gleam of revelation. If the solicitor Harcourt and Miss Eleanor conspired to recover or alter the will, then someone else must have intervened, someone who wished to prevent their plan. He turned to Miss Maud. "You mentioned a missing salver from the study. Do you recall when it was last seen?" "Only the day before the murder," she replied. "Its absence was not noted until the police arrived." "An object removed in haste or with intent to conceal," Whimsy mused. "And yet such a detail might hold the key to unraveling the precise sequence of events." He requested to examine the study once more, noting every minute irregularity, the slight disarray of papers, the misaligned clock stopped at 9:17, the faint smell of lavender mingled with tobacco smoke. Then came the critical observation. The curtains. They were drawn unevenly, one side overlapping the other by an inch, enough to obscure the window latch from casual glance. Whimsy's voice dropped to a whisper. A staged scene to mislead or delay discovery. Parker, who had been silent until now, interjected with a practical note. "Might someone have manipulated the curtains after the fact, sir?" "Indeed. And whoever did so was familiar with the room and its habits, a member of the household or trusted visitor." The investigation gained momentum as Whimsy synthesized these fragments. The murder was not a simple act of passion or greed, but a calculated move within a broader scheme of concealment and inheritance. Later that evening, in the privacy of the vicarage library, Whimsy confided in Parker, "The gloves left behind, the locked gate, the missing salver. They are not random. They are messages, clues planted by the murderer, either out of arrogance or desperation." Parker nodded. "And the second visitor?" "An accomplice or a red herring. That remains to be seen." As the clock struck midnight, Whimsy stood by the window, gazing into the misty garden where shadows danced and secrets waited to be unearthed. The pieces were assembled, but the final pattern still eluded him. One question remained paramount. Who wielded the knife, and why had they gambled so recklessly on leaving such conspicuous signs? The game was reaching its climax, and Lord Peter Wimsey's sharp mind was poised to unmask the truth hidden behind the garden gate that was latched. The late hour had brought a stillness to the vicarage that felt almost reverential, as if the very walls themselves awaited the revelation that Lord Peter Wimsey was about to deliver. Gathered once more in the drawing-room were all those touched by the tangled threads of this melancholy affair, the grieving, the guilty, and the curious alike. Wimsey stood with the serene assurance of a man who has wrestled the truth from the shadows and found it willing to confess. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone deliberately measured, "it is often said that the devil is in the details. In this case, the devil, if I may be so bold, is none other than human nature itself, wrapped in envy, desperation, and the cunning masquerade of loyalty." He cast a sidelong glance at Giles, whose pallor deepened. The latched garden gate, the misplaced glove, the missing salver, the halting clocks, all of these are fragments of a carefully constructed tableau designed to mislead and confuse. "Miss Eleanor," Wimsey continued, "your arrival and your fervent claim to the Blundell inheritance were genuine, but you underestimated the depths to which others would sink to prevent that claim. The solicitor, Harcourt, was indeed your accomplice in planning to amend the will, yet he did not foresee that the true architect of tragedy lay closer to home." The room held its breath. "Giles," the loyal butler, "you feared losing your station and influence should the new will come to light. Your devotion was, I am afraid, a cloak for darker ambitions. When the dispute escalated into confrontation by the study window, you seized the opportunity to silence Lady Blundell." The butler's hands trembled, his eyes darting like a cornered animal's. "Your knowledge of the household habits allowed you to manipulate the curtains, to lock the garden gate, and to leave the glove as a deliberate diversion. The missing salver, taken to remove evidence, was the final touch in your elaborate ruse. Whimsy paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle before continuing with the quiet precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The second visitor, the mysterious solicitor, was unwittingly drawn into your scheme. His panic led to his hasty departure, leaving you alone to attempt to steer suspicion elsewhere. A sudden, sharp intake of breath broke the stillness as Giles's composure shattered. "I did what I must to protect the family name," he cried, voice cracking with both anger and remorse. "Better that than let outsiders trample our heritage." Lord Peter gave a faint smile, the faintest glint of pity shining behind his eyes. "And yet, in the process, you destroyed not only Lady Blundell's life, but the very legacy you sought to guard." He turned then to Miss Eleanor. "Your role, though complicated, is that of a hopeful claimant wronged by circumstance. I trust that justice tempered with mercy will be afforded you." The assembled guests murmured among themselves, some in relief, others in shock. Whimsy concluded, "It is a curious thing, how loyalty can mutate into obsession and guardianship into tyranny. The truth, once unearthed, reveals the fragile architecture upon which we build our lives." As the constable stepped forward to take Giles into custody, Whimsy lit a slender cigar, the amber glow briefly illuminating his amused and contemplative expression. "Now," he mused aloud, "perhaps we might all recall that a locked garden gate can keep out more than mere strangers. It can imprison secrets better left unspoken, until, of course, a keen eye and a steady mind decide otherwise." With that, Lord Peter Whimsy inclined his head, the corners of his mouth curling in that arch, enigmatic smile, and withdrew into the night, leaving behind the silence of a mystery resolved and the lingering question of what other secrets the quiet English countryside might yet conceal.